It starts with a small hesitation, a weird vibration. Then one day, your transmission quits without warning. Most people never see it coming until they're staring at a $5,000 bill. Today, I'm revealing 9 hidden signs your transmission's already in trouble. Ignore them, and that quiet hum under your hood becomes a time bomb waiting to explode. The first warning is something most drivers overlook, but it's the start of serious trouble. Number 9. Strawberry milkshake fluid. Pop the hood and spot transmission fluid that looks like watered-down strawberry milk, and you've got trouble. That frothy pink mix means coolant has slipped into the automatic transmission's cooling circuit, usually through a tiny crack in the radiator's built-in heat exchanger. Once the higher pressure coolant pushes past, it contaminates the fluid almost instantly. The damage begins with chemistry. Transmission clutches are hygroscopic, meaning they soak up water like a sponge. Instead of holding fluid that allows smooth friction, the linings absorb coolant and lose their grip. As one industry bulletin bluntly states, water or ethylene glycol in automatic transmission fluid is harmful to internal components and will change the friction of the clutches. That single breach can rewrite the behavior of every gear change. Inside, the torque converter works like a blender. Within seconds, it circulates the mix through the pump, valve body, and lubrication circuits. Solenoids that depend on stable pressure now see foam and air bubbles, which compress instead of clamping clutches. The control module tries to compensate, adding pressure and delaying shifts, but the result is uneven, shuddering gear changes that only get worse with heat. Heat is the second enemy. Fluid life is halved for every 20 degrees. Fahrenheit rise above 175. Contamination drives both temperature and oxidation up, burning seals and glazing clutch plates. Some technicians call it a death spiral. Slipping causes heat. Heat destroys fluid, and ruined fluid causes more slip. At that point, a once healthy transmission is on borrowed time. Owners sometimes see clues before the road test. A dipstick gone milky pink, or a coolant reservoir mysteriously overfilling with a brown oily mix are giveaways. Toyota and Nissan drivers grimly call it the pink milkshake, and the name has stuck across brands. It is a simple sight, but it means the inside of your gearbox is being eaten alive. Acting quickly is the difference between hundreds and thousands of dollars. Replace the cooler and flush both systems fast, and there's a chance of survival. Wait, and you are likely staring at a rebuild costing $4,000 to $7,000. That one pink dipstick can decide whether your car keeps driving or heads for the scrapyard. You can see that one coming. But what happens when the warning hides deep inside the torque converter itself? At number 8, rumble strip vibration. You are cruising at 40 to 50 miles per hour on a light throttle when the car suddenly feels like it rolled over a rumble strip. A moment later, it fades, only to return again under the same conditions. That odd buzz is a torque converter clutch shudder, a small part inside the converter grabbing and slipping in rapid cycles instead of locking smoothly. The torque converter is meant to couple the engine and transmission with fluid, then lock up with a clutch for efficiency. When that clutch hunts between holding and slipping, the whole driveline shivers. Engineers call it frictional vibration during lockup slip. Shops describe it more simply: a brief shake when the converter clutch applies, usually around 45 miles per hour. Here's why it feels so strange. The clutch material and the fluid between it have a friction curve that should stay stable. With worn linings, overheated fluid, or the wrong chemistry, that curve turns unstable and the clutch cannot settle. The result is the tug of war you feel through the seat. In plain terms, the fluid and clutch are fighting each other hundreds of times a second. There is even a simple road test that tips you off. Hold speed where the vibration happens and lightly tap the brake with your left foot. The converter unlocks instantly when it sees brake input. If the shutter vanishes the moment you tap, you have just confirmed the converter clutch is the culprit. Many owners chase this ghost by replacing tires, balancing wheels, or hunting for suspension noise. But the signature is narrow: a light throttle cruise in a small speed window that disappears with acceleration or braking. Tire or bearing noise does not vanish when you touch the brake. Torque converter shutter does. Heat and neglect make the issue worse. A rule of thumb says that every 20 degrees Fahrenheit above 175 cuts fluid life in half. That is why shudder often shows up after years without a proper fluid exchange. General Motors even issued a bulletin curing a notorious 8-speed shudder with nothing more than a complete switch to a revised fluid. Ignore it, and microslip soon becomes macro damage. The converter clutch sheds debris, pressures rise, and heat snowballs until you are facing a torque converter replacement or a full rebuild costing thousands. Catch it early, and it may only take the right fluid service to restore smooth, quiet cruising. Before we move on, tap that subscribe button. Think of it as your shortcut to smarter car care and avoiding those surprise bills down the road. At number 7, transmission temp light. That little AT oil temp, or transmission temp light, is not just a dash decoration. It is your car screaming for help. When it turns on, the fluid has crossed into a danger zone where heat begins to attack seals, clutches, and the fluid itself. Subaru's own manuals put it bluntly. The light means your automatic transmission fluid is too hot, and the first move is to pull over and let it cool. Heat inside a transmission builds the same way it does in brakes. Clutches generate friction, the torque converter shears fluid, and the pump is constantly churning oil through tiny passages. Normally, the cooler circuit carries all that heat away, but if you are towing, climbing, or pushing the car hard, the balance tips. The warning light tells you the system is making heat faster than it can shed it. The numbers are sobering. Transmission specialists repeat the old rule. Every 20 degrees Fahrenheit above about 175 cuts the fluid's life in half. At around 220 degrees, you start forming varnish. At 240, seals harden, and by 280, you are cooking the transmission into failure. A light at that point is not a suggestion, it is a line in the sand. Modern control modules do more than flash a bulb. They watch a fluid temperature sensor and, if limits are crossed, they can pull power, delay lockup, or force limp mode to save the hardware. That limp mode often fools drivers into thinking the engine is weak, when in reality the transmission is protecting itself. The chemistry behind it makes the warning even more urgent. Hot fluid oxidizes, turning dark and losing its friction stability. Once that happens, clutches slip more, which creates even more heat, a vicious cycle that ends in a burnt rebuild bill. The upside is that early action pays. If you see the light once on a hot climb, backing off and servicing the fluid with the correct specification may restore years of life. Ignore it, and you are staring at a $2,500 to $5,000 rebuild. Treat that light like a gift, because it is your one early warning before silent damage becomes permanent. That warning light is your first mercy. The next symptom? No warning at all, just a car that suddenly refuses to shift. At number 6, stuck in limp mode. Limp mode is not your car giving up. It is the transmission protecting itself. When the system senses a fault it cannot trust, it locks you into a low gear, usually second or third, so you can still drive slowly to safety. Think of it as the gearbox's emergency escape plan. What actually happens is the control module compares data from speed sensors, temperature sensors, and pressure circuits. If the numbers do not add up, it stops normal shifting. The logic is simple. Better to let you crawl home in one gear than to risk a catastrophic failure by pretending everything is fine. The locked gear is chosen for survival. It keeps pump speed high enough to maintain hydraulic pressure and cooling flow, while avoiding the extra strain of higher gears. On many Toyotas, for example, the module will deliberately block fifth gear if a sensor fails, trapping the box in a limited pattern until the fault is cleared. From behind the wheel, limp mode feels like you just lost power. The engine revs climb, the car refuses to upshift, and acceleration becomes sluggish. Drivers often mistake it for a blown engine or traction control problem. The truth is, the transmission is saying, "Stop now before I hurt myself." The triggers are varied. A bad speed sensor, clogged filter, low fluid level, or a slipping clutch pack can all confuse the control system. Even wrong fluid chemistry can push a transmission into limp under heavy load. Some Nissan CVTs are notorious for entering fail-safe on long climbs if filled with non-spec oil. Here's the kicker. Ignoring limp mode only compounds the damage. Driving fast in that locked gear overheats the converter, oxidizes fluid, and accelerates clutch wear. What could have been a $200 sensor or a simple fluid correction can snowball into a $4,000 rebuild. The smartest play is to respect the sign. Pull over, cool down, and get the codes read from the transmission computer, not just the engine. Often, the fix is surprisingly minor, but the system gives you only one warning shot. Treat limp mode as a gift of time, not as permission to keep driving until the gearbox fails. When things get serious, your car sends a different kind of signal. The next sign might surprise you. At number 5, pink puddle warning. A small pink or red puddle under the nose of your car is not just a coolant drip. It might be your transmission crying for help. Many vehicles route transmission fluid through a cooler inside the radiator or through separate lines up front. When that system cracks, automatic transmission fluid can leak outside or even mix with coolant, leaving that infamous strawberry milkshake look in the reservoir. The risk is bigger than a messy stain. Transmission fluid does double duty as both hydraulic power and cooling liquid. Lose enough of it and the pressure drops, clutch packs slip, and the whole system overheats. A dry automatic transmission can burn itself up in just a few minutes of driving. That is why manufacturers like General Motors warn bluntly: water or coolant in transmission fluid destroys internal parts. Drivers often mistake the sign because coolant itself can be pink. The clue is location and texture. A puddle under the radiator seam or a frothy coolant bottle that looks like a melted shake points to cooler failure. Transmission fluid feels slick and leaves an oily film, while coolant dries chalky. If you check the dipstick and the fluid looks cloudy or foamy, that is contamination, not heat damage. The chemistry explains the urgency. Clutch plates are designed around precise friction curves. Mix glycol into the fluid and the paper linings swell, adhesives fail, and the friction behavior vanishes. Shops call it a death sentence. Once coolant touches those clutches, they will never bite the same way again. That is why bulletins say replace the torque converter and rebuild the unit if contamination is confirmed. This failure has a nickname among Nissan and Toyota owners: SMOD, the strawberry milkshake of death. Radiator coolers can fail anywhere from 60 to 120,000 miles, leaving owners with a pink reservoir and a slipping gearbox. Some enthusiasts bypass the radiator cooler entirely with external units just to eliminate the risk. The costs tell the story. A radiator swap might run under $2,000. Ignore the pink puddle, and you are looking at a $5,000 to $6,000 transmission replacement. That little splash on the pavement could literally be the cheapest early warning your car ever gives you. That pink stain tells a story of failure, but the next clue is all sound and timing, and it catches almost everyone off guard. At number 4, delayed upshift trouble. When your car holds onto a gear and the engine revs higher than normal before finally shifting, that's not sport mode. It's your transmission hesitating. Inside the case, a clutch pack should grab cleanly when commanded. If hydraulic pressure is weak or the fluid is off its game, the grip isn't there. The engine revs climb, the shift arrives late, and the driveline feels like it's freewheeling before it catches. An upshift is a handoff. One clutch releases while another applies, and the valve body meters fluid to keep the overlap smooth. If the fluid is aerated, too thin, or blocked by a worn valve, the apply time stretches. Transmission builders put it simply: low line pressure equals soft shifts, burnt clutches, and bad timing. That's the mechanical story behind a lazy upshift. Modern control modules don't just guess, they watch sensors. Input speed, output speed, throttle angle, and fluid temperature all feed the brain. When the data doesn't add up, you might see a P0730 incorrect gear ratio code, which is shop speak for the ratio I measured doesn't match what I ordered. That mismatch often begins with a delayed or flared upshift on the road. Fluid chemistry is the hidden player. Automatic transmission fluid isn't just oil, it's engineered with friction modifiers to make clutches bite at just the right speed. Oxidized or wrong spec fluid shifts that friction curve. The result? Delayed upshifts, shudder, or flare between gears. Heat makes it worse. Every 20 degrees Fahrenheit above the safe zone cuts fluid life dramatically, and overheated oil can't hold pressure the way fresh fluid can. Drivers often think this problem lives in the engine. A misfire or throttle quirk can also cause high revs with little speed. The difference is ratio change. If the car isn't shifting on time, it's a transmission problem. Scan data confirms it. Late ratio changes equal hydraulic slip. The cost swing is massive. A fluid and software fix might land in the hundreds. Ignore the warning, and scorched clutches can turn that late shift into a four-figure rebuild. When your tachometer lingers and your shift drags, that's the transmission whispering before it screams. Late shifts are annoying. The next sign? You'll feel it the instant you try to move. At number 3, jerky takeoff warning. That little lunge you feel when easing off the brake shouldn't be there. A smooth car should glide forward. If yours hesitates, then suddenly bites and surges, that's a sign the transmission isn't applying power cleanly. It feels like the driveline is toggling on and off instead of rolling you out steadily. The mechanics behind it are surprisingly delicate. At launch, the torque converter multiplies torque, the pump builds pressure, and valves route fluid so the right clutch engages. If pressure is late or uneven, you get a slip followed by a sudden catch. Think of it like shaking hands. If the grip is weak at first, then clamps hard, the interaction feels awkward. Inside the valve body, pencil-thin spools move in microscopic clearances. When varnish or debris makes them stick, fluid flow lags and then snaps free. That snap is what you feel as a bump. It's not the tires and it's not your foot. It's the hydraulics catching up. Fluid quality shapes everything. Automatic transmission fluid isn't just lubrication. It's chemistry designed to control friction. Heat breaks it down, and every 20 degrees Fahrenheit past 200 roughly halves its life. Once the chemistry drifts, clutch plates don't grab smoothly. That's why oxidized or wrong-spec fluid is such a common culprit for low-speed jerks. Electronics add another twist. The transmission control module adapts constantly, trimming pressure based on sensor inputs. A corroded connector or flaky signal can trick it into commanding the wrong pressure for a split second. Reset the module and the jerk may disappear until the underlying problem returns. Ignoring the symptom is costly. Each harsh catch hammers, clutch faces, and mounts, building heat that glazes friction and cooks seals. A fluid service and adaptation reset might solve it early for a few $100s. Wait until the clutches are scarred and you're staring down a rebuild that easily runs into thousands. Takeaway? A herky-jerky launch is not just how the car drives. It's the transmission showing stress where smoothness should be. Catch it early, and you save both money and driveline health. Ignore it, and every stoplight becomes a countdown to bigger repairs. That lurch off the line is your first clue, but the next warning hides behind a light most drivers shrug off. Number 2, check engine codes. When that orange light pops up on your dash, it's easy to assume the engine is to blame. But plenty of times, the light is telling a transmission story. Modern cars use the transmission control module to keep track of every shift, every clutch apply, and every torque converter lockup. When the numbers don't add up, say the input speed and output speed don't match the gear you're supposed to be in, it throws a code and asks the engine computer to turn on the check engine light. A common one is P0700. That code doesn't point to a broken part. It's a flag saying the transmission has something important to say. Dig into the transmission module, and you'll often see codes like P0741 for torque converter performance or P0730 for incorrect gear ratio. What those really mean is that the computer commanded a move, but the hardware didn't respond the way it should. The details matter here. The torque converter clutch, for example, is designed to run in controlled slip for smoother driving. If it can't hold that slip window, the module knows long before you feel a shudder. Likewise, if line pressure doesn't rise when the pump is told to, you'll see a low pressure code, even if the car still drives. These are early warnings you can act on before expensive damage sets in. Heat is the big multiplier. Transmission fluid starts to oxidize around the low 200s in degrees Fahrenheit, and by 300 degrees, the unit is on borrowed time. When the chemistry changes, friction surfaces no longer behave as designed. The module only sees that the clutch won't hold, so it sets a code. Here's the real takeaway. These lights aren't guessing. They're precise math catching a mismatch you can't feel yet. Sometimes the fix is as simple as a fluid exchange with the exact updated spec, or repairing a worn valve bore. Catch it at that stage and you're talking hundreds of dollars. Ignore it until clutches glaze and debris spreads, and you're facing a rebuild or replacement in the thousands. That little light may feel like an annoyance, but it's often the cheapest early warning your car will ever give you. A simple light on your dash is one thing. What comes next is the unmistakable feel of a dying transmission. Finally, at number 1, slipping on takeoff. You press the gas, the engine revs climb, but the car hesitates like it is dragging an invisible anchor. That delay is classic transmission slip on takeoff. It feels like a rubber band stretching before the tires finally catch, and it is your gearbox admitting it cannot grab the way it should. Inside the transmission, hydraulic pressure is everything. The pump builds pressure, the valve body routes it, and the clutch packs use it to clamp and hold. When seals leak, valves wear, or fluid gets too thin, that pressure drops. Instead of locking smoothly, the clutches slip for a second before they bite. Every slip builds heat, and heat shortens a transmission's life faster than anything else. You will usually notice the slip when the car is hot, not cold. That is no coincidence. As fluid warms, it thins, leaks grow, and weak circuits lose their grip. A marginal transmission might drive fine in the morning, then flare at the first stoplight after a few miles. That hot worse than cold pattern is one of the surest fingerprints of low pressure and tired clutches. The torque converter can also join the act. If its stator one-way clutch fails or the lockup clutch drags at the wrong moment, the converter cannot multiply torque correctly, and the engine races without the car moving. Dual clutch transmissions show the same thing in their own way. Worn launch clutches judder and slip before they engage. Different hardware, same symptom. Drivers often confuse slip with engine problems. A misfire can make revs jump, but road speed usually drops in sync. True transmission slip shows revs rising while the car barely moves. A faint burnt smell after a hot drive only confirms the diagnosis. Clutches are cooking. Ignore this sign, and every slip peels away clutch material, sends debris through the valve body, and accelerates the death spiral. Early, a proper fluid service, pressure check, or valve body repair can fix it for hundreds. Wait, and you are buying a rebuild that runs $3,000 to $7,000. That hesitation off the line is not just annoying, it is your transmission warning you before the real bill arrives. Now that you know these 9 transmission warning signs, don't wait for a costly repair. Check out our next video on 19 cheap car upgrades that save you thousands instantly.